Prime Minister Justin Trudeau just doesn't care about Canadian content creators. When Heritage Minister Pablo Rodriguez first tabled Bill C11, which is of course the Trudeau government censorship bill, the number one reason he gave for creating the legislation was to promote the interests of Canadian content creators. The Trudeau government wants all of us to believe that this bill is just about making Canadian content more accessible and boosting the online presence of Canadian artists. But Canadian creators say that the government is dead wrong, and the government, they just don't want to listen. Bill C11 has always been a bad bill. If passed, it would invade our privacy and lessen our ability as citizens to hold the government to account, because it would influence what we can say and see online. But even beyond those concerns, the government's very rationale for introducing this legislation, it's been completely debunked. Canadian content creators say the legislation would hurt, not help, their ability to succeed in the online world. On platforms like YouTube and TikTok, Bill C11 would force feed domestic viewers here in Canada Canadian content that we're not interested in, and it would come into our feeds just because it counts as Canadian. The problem is, if we don't click and watch that stuff, YouTube's algorithms take it as if people aren't interested in the content. The algorithm thinks that it's simply bad content, and that means that beyond our borders, YouTube will deprioritize this content because it doesn't think that viewers find it interesting. You don't just have to take my word for it when I say that this bill is terrible for Canadian creators. Regina-born TikTok sensation Tesher says that if Bill C11 had been in place when he was first sharing his music, his career would never have even started. That's because Tesher gained popularity outside of Canada's borders first and only became popular in Canada later. If Tesher's content had been deprioritized abroad before he was discovered by Hindi and Punjabi-speaking fans internationally, Tesher himself doesn't think he would have found success. His fellow YouTube star J.J. McCullough, who we know so well, completely agrees about these dangers. Here's a great quote from McCullough, quote, "Overnight, creators are going to wake up and find that the kind of content that has previously been successful in an unregulated YouTube is no longer successful in a regulated YouTube," unquote. What does that mean? Canadian content might fare a tiny bit better here within Canada, but it's going to be a flop all around the world. YouTube's top Canadian spokesperson delivered the exact same message to the Senate's Transport and Communications Committee, noting that no other country in the world imposes these kind of requirements. She said to senators, "Imagine if France or the UK or India was doing the same thing, where they required prominence for their local artists at home. That would mean that in every other country that follows Canada's lead, Canadian content would be going to the back of the line." Ms. Patel, who is speaking for YouTube, says that most Canadians on YouTube rely on 90% outside of Canada for their viewership. Canadian YouTubers are therefore at risk of losing the vast majority of their audience. Clearly, Bill C11 would hurt the small-time creators that the government says it's really trying to help. Bill C11 also raises huge privacy concerns. Currently, YouTube and other platforms, they don't track where we are coming from when we're watching content. But Bill C11 would force platforms to track where we're coming from so that they can decide whether or not we're in Canada to push what the government wants us to have us pushed. That puts Canadians' privacy right on the line. The last thing Canadians want is for more online tracking and less privacy, and for the government to be able to see everything that we do in the online world. The Privacy Commissioner completely agrees with this position. Here's a great quote from Daniel Therrien, who is the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, quote, "The bill would represent a step back overall for privacy protection," unquote. This is not just the Canadian Taxpayers Federation saying this. This is a government-appointed bureaucrat saying this. The bottom line is that if Bill C11 is all about helping Canadian content creators, recent testimony would suggest that the bill should be ripped up into shreds, because it does exactly the opposite of what the government claims that it wants to do, which is help Canadian content creators. My friends, it is time for us to say to Ottawa once and for all, now is the time to scrap this dangerous piece of legislation. It's time to end Bill C11 and stop censorship in Canada.